Across the world, Indian origin populations are not only establishing communities, but also becoming integral parts of the nations where they reside. This development goes beyond migration or simple settlement. In many countries, Indians are being absorbed into the national fabric in such a way that they are regarded as local citizens rather than outsiders. At the same time, India itself continues to maintain ties with its diaspora through policies and cultural initiatives. Taken together, these dynamics point to the emergence of a global Indian presence that influences economies, politics, and cultures far beyond South Asia. According to estimates, more than 32 million people of Indian origin live outside India. While diaspora communities exist in dozens of countries, 9 nations in particular illustrate how Indian origin populations are no longer seen merely as migrants, but as co-owners of national identity. These countries, United States, United Kingdom, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Canada, South Africa, Fiji, Mauritius, and Trinidad and Tobago, demonstrate patterns of cultural absorption, political participation, and economic interdependence that are reshaping both host societies and India's own position in the world. United States. The United States hosts one of the most visible Indian diasporas, particularly in sectors such as technology, healthcare, and academia. High-profile leaders include Sundar Pichai, Google, Satya Nadella, Microsoft, and Shantanu Narayen, Adobe. Yet beyond corporate leadership, Indians are influencing everyday cultural and community life. In parts of Silicon Valley, Indian festivals such as Diwali function as de facto holidays. Large technology firms may operate at reduced capacity during this period due to the concentration of Indian employees. Neighborhoods like Fremont, California, reflect linguistic and cultural continuity, with second- and third-generation Indian Americans maintaining languages such as Gujarati and Tamil at home. Policy frameworks have also facilitated Indian integration. The U.S. National Interest Waiver within its immigration system disproportionately benefits Indian applicants, particularly in specialized professions. In 2023 alone, over 200,000 Indians secured some form of permanent residency, indicating not only large-scale migration, but long-term settlement. United Kingdom Britain's relationship with Indians has shifted dramatically from the colonial era to the present. Today, Indian origin figures hold top political offices. Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister, Priti Patel as former Home Secretary, and Sajid Javid as former Chancellor of the Exchequer. At the cultural level, Indian influence is visible in education, heritage, and cuisine. British school curricula now describe the 1857 rebellion as the First War of Indian Independence, rather than simply a mutiny. The British Museum presents Indian artifacts as part of shared heritage. Food provides another measure of absorption. Curry has been described as a national dish, signaling the incorporation of Indian cuisine into British identity. United Arab Emirates. The UAE provides perhaps the most concentrated example of Indian demographic influence. Roughly 1 in 3 residents is of Indian origin, making Indians central to the country's labor force and consumer base. Legal frameworks have been established to accommodate this reality. Educational curricula aligned with Indian models, property ownership rights for Indians, and facilitation of business operations indicate institutional adaptation. Dubai's leadership has publicly acknowledged Indians not as temporary migrants, but as partners in nation-building. In several respects, the UAE has constructed what could be termed a parallel India within its borders, competing with India itself to attract and retain Indian professionals and entrepreneurs. Saudi Arabia. For Indian Muslims, Saudi Arabia is the center of religious life. The Saudi government has created visa categories tailored to Indian pilgrims, extending beyond the annual Hajj to year-round religious visits. Urban planning in certain areas incorporates Indian religious practices, further embedding Indian communities into Saudi society. Statements from Saudi leadership reinforce this orientation. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman remarked that Indian Muslims visiting holy sites were returning home, framing the connection in terms of belonging rather than foreignness. This indicates that India's religious and cultural linkages with Saudi Arabia are not only preserved, but institutionally recognized. Canada has positioned itself as one of the most open destinations for Indian migrants, particularly through its Express Entry program, which rewards English proficiency, higher education, and work experience. Areas where Indian applicants are often highly competitive. Cities such as Brampton and Surrey have large Punjabi-speaking populations. Local politics reflects this demographic reality, with Canadian-born politicians addressing constituents in Punjabi and framing Indian festivals as part of Canadian tradition. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's public participation in Indian cultural events, including appearances in traditional clothing, highlights the visibility of Indian identity in Canada. In effect, Indian immigration is not only accommodated but is shaping Canada's brand as a multicultural society. South Africa Indians arrived in South Africa in the 19th century as indentured workers under British colonial administration. Despite systemic discrimination during apartheid, they established permanent communities and played significant roles in the anti-apartheid struggle. Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy of satyagraha was first developed during his years in South Africa, linking Indian and South African histories. Today, the government recognizes Indians as a founding community rather than a minority group. This designation places Indian-origin South Africans within the core narrative of the nation rather than at its margins. Fiji Indians were brought to Fiji as indentured laborers in the late 19th century. Although they were initially intended as temporary workers, their descendants now comprise nearly 40% of the population. Indo-Fijians have significantly shaped national identity through language, religion, and culture. Hindi has been granted the status of an official language. Diwali is celebrated as a national holiday, and Indian music is broadcast on local radio. Fiji's tourism industry promotes elements of Indian culture, from dance to cuisine, as part of its appeal to visitors. Despite periodic political tensions between ethnic groups, Indian traditions are firmly embedded in Fijian society. Mauritius demonstrates one of the most complete integrations of Indian heritage into national identity. Over 65% of its population traces ancestry to India. However, Mauritians do not identify as Indian migrants, but as Mauritians with Indian heritage. Indian languages are used in Parliament, and major Indian festivals are part of the national calendar. Religious institutions tied to Indian traditions are widespread. At the same time, Mauritius maintains its own distinct identity, balancing local and Indian elements. Statements from its leadership, including references to India as a motherland, highlight the depth of connection. Trinidad and Tobago Indians arrived in Trinidad and Tobago as indentured laborers in the 19th century and have since become a key component of the national identity. Cultural practices from India have fused with Caribbean traditions, producing new hybrid forms. Music provides a clear example. Chutney music combines Indian classical melodies with Caribbean rhythms. Cuisine blends Indian curries with local flavors. Festivals such as Carnival incorporate Indian elements alongside Afro-Caribbean practices. Former Prime Minister Kamla Persad Bissessar described Indo-Trinidadians not as Indians abroad, but as Trinidadian Indians, underscoring the development of a distinct identity that is both local and diasporic. Shared patterns across 9 countries. Although these countries differ widely in geography and history, several common themes emerge. Demographic centrality. In places like the UAE and Mauritius, Indians represent a substantial portion of the total population. Institutional adaptation, legal, educational, and policy frameworks are reshaped to accommodate Indian communities, from visa policies in Saudi Arabia to school curricula in the UK. Economic dependence: sectors of host economies rely heavily on Indian labor and consumption. For example, the UK's curry industry employs more workers than its steel industry, and US technology firms are staffed disproportionately by Indians. Cultural absorption: Indian festivals, languages, and cuisines are celebrated as national rather than minority traditions. Political integration: Indian origin leaders hold office at the highest levels in countries such as the UK and Canada. Globally, the Indian diaspora sends over $100 billion in remittances back to India annually. At the same time, they spend nearly 3 times that amount within their host countries, reinforcing their economic significance abroad. India's engagement with its diaspora: India itself continues to maintain connections with overseas communities. Initiatives such as the Overseas Citizen of India (OCI) card, diaspora investment schemes, and cultural diplomacy programs are designed to preserve ties. Indian cinema, music, and literature also reflect diasporic influences, incorporating settings and styles from Canada, the UK, the Caribbean, and the Middle East. Implications: the integration of Indians into these 9 countries raises broader questions about identity and nationality. Indian origin populations are able to maintain cultural traditions while simultaneously adopting host national identities. This dual belonging challenges traditional definitions of citizenship based solely on geography. Some scholars argue that this trend represents a form of post-national identity, where individuals align with multiple cultural and political communities at once. Others describe it as cultural ambassadorship, where diaspora populations bridge their heritage with their adopted homelands. What is clear is that the Indian diaspora has become an indispensable component of multiple national systems, from healthcare in the UK to technology in the US to labor and investment in the Gulf states. Host nations are not merely accepting Indian communities, but actively competing to attract and retain them. The experience of Indian origin populations across the United States, United Kingdom, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Canada, South Africa, Fiji, Mauritius, and Trinidad and Tobago demonstrates a unique pattern of global integration. These communities are not temporary or peripheral, but central to the cultural, political, and economic structures of their host societies. At the same time, India continues to maintain connections with its diaspora, producing a dynamic exchange of identity and influence. Together, these trends suggest the rise of a global Indian presence that transcends borders, reshaping concepts of nationality and belonging in the 21st century.